This video is brought to you by Wicket Cricket Manager.
Hello and welcome to episode 43 of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Kazi and you can find me at Def Mango on Twitter. And with me, of course, is Jared Kimber, and you can find him pretty much everywhere. And yeah, well, this is pretty much the Stuart Broad Uncovered podcast episode, but we'll get to that in a bit. England have won the final test at the Oval by 49 runs. And Jared, just overall, would you say that since 2005, this was the best Ashes series we've witnessed? Because, come to think of it, had the Manchester test not gotten washed out, England could have probably won this 3-2, and that would have made for a phenomenal story.
Yeah, it would have been even more exciting then. Yeah, I think I didn't cover 2005. It was actually that in 2006-07 were the last two I didn't cover, and I've covered everything since. So this was my 2005, if that makes sense. It wasn't quite on the same level, but from a narrative point of view, from a excitement point of view, from a craziness point of view, from Alex Carey's haircuts and all those sorts of things, it certainly had a lot going on. So it was. I remember, so I did 2009, 2010, 11, 13, 14, 15. And if you go right through those, I think I wrote a book on 2 or 3 of those series. I can't remember how many. I wrote a lot of books. And there was interesting stuff and there was cricket played in them and everything else, but they weren't like this. This is the first time I think in a long time I felt like the Ashes were incredible. 13, 14 was breathtaking because of Mitchell Johnson, but it wasn't particularly a great series. 2019, I thought was really, really fascinating. But again, it was probably closer than it deserved to be. But look, just coming down to close test matches and everything. I mean, the fact that on day 5, at whatever time it was, whenever this match finished, midnight, from what I could tell, we still had the chance of kind of everything happening at various stages. And yes, it wasn't like it was 2-2 and both teams were playing for the win, which would have been even more fantastic. But there was a chance that Australia would win the series. There was a chance that England would draw. It could have come right down to the wire, that match and everything else. Just, you don't get that in Ashes cricket that much. So for me, it was by far the best I've ever covered.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, 2005 Ashes is that one test series that I always go back to as that series that absolutely got me hooked to cricket. And I'm sure, or test cricket. And I'm sure I don't just speak for myself. There are plenty of other people who did the same thing for them. But this one was just like, sure, the quality of cricket, you could argue that might not have been up to 2005's level, but the entertainment was just phenomenal. And all the weird stuff that we've seen, and I'm sure we'll get into it, it's just been a very unique and peculiar Ashes series in that regard. But let's talk about Stuart Broad, the Nighthawk. He's hung his boots and we won't ever get to see him play cricket again, period. He's also, retired from the domestic circuit. And, well, 604 wickets, that is quite an accomplishment over 167 test matches. You've got to hand it to Broad for his longevity as well. And just, he's been one of those animated characters of our sport that we've loved to had. And there've been good moments, there've been bad moments. They've been controversial ones. They've been hilarious moments. But overall, it was really nice and heartwarming to see a series in which there was so much drama. All the Australians, they gave Broad a guard of honor. And I think that was just brilliant for the sport. And it shows that, there are certain things that are above all rivalry.
They tried to give Jimmy one as well, by the way, and Jimmy didn't want to walk through. Look, I think he's probably almost the face of that sort of arrogant England player over the last 15 years, but certainly over the last 8 to 10 years. Probably, I think a lot of fans around the world would see him as overhyped. There's a lot of time where he was quite average. It takes him 73 test matches to get a bowling average under 30, for instance, and yet for all the talk, you wouldn't have ever thought that he was that kind of bowler. Breaking Hayder's hand, making the 100 when the match fixing was on.
167 at Lord's, wasn't it?
Yeah, all those, just like taking his shoe off to time waste. My personal favorite was he faced 4 balls at one stage, and during a toilet break went off to go. Like, he's kind of the face of all that sort of nonsense, right? And he is that. I don't think cricket quite has a Joel Embiid. And in the NBA, Joel Embiid is famous for kind of knowing what the narrative is around him and participating in that narrative. I think that Stuart Broad is probably the closest we have. He's a little bit different. He's probably a little bit less trolly than Joel Embiid, although to be fair, he plays his part. But he was aware of what the narrative was around him, and was also aware enough to sometimes play with that narrative and have fun with it. For instance, you see tonight, one of the last major acts he has in Test cricket is literally changing the bails again, right? Like, he's so aware of his position and everything else. And, I didn't write about this in my Stuart Broad piece, which is probably already up. Don't go read it yet, everyone. Wait till we finish talking. But in that piece, like, the reason that he gives the retirement speech on the afternoon on day 4 is because he'd already written his retirement column for the newspaper the next day, right? Like, everything is so staged and planned with him. But he is one of the more intelligent cricketers as well. Like, I remember talking to the ECB. This was 2009, perhaps. I've probably told this story before, but the ECB came to me to ask how cricket should be aimed at a different audience. I had, Cricket with Balls had a huge audience at that stage, and I think they just worked that out. And they were like, "Oh, this guy's talking to people who we don't normally talk to. How do we go to that?" And I gave them a bunch of plans, all of which they ignored. Every single one they ignored. But I remember them really clearly. One of the things I said was, Flintoff is, I think he was about to retire or had just retired. And I said, you have to build other Flintoffs. You can't just assume that this is going to happen naturally. And I said, you've got Graham Swan and you've got Stuart Broad. You can actually market them to 2 different audiences at the same time and do something with them. And I wasn't even a big Stuart Broad fan, but I understood what he could do. And it's the same reason now he's basically going to walk straight off the field, straight into the Sky Suite. Like, how many players actually do that who are good at broadcasting? Sometimes you do it because you're really famous, right? But, guys like him and Ashwin are perfect examples of players who could just literally walk off the field and they will be instantly at home in that environment. And that's because they are smart, but they also are aware of the world out there beyond them. And then on top of all that, you just have how fantastic Stuart Broad is when things work. And I think it almost makes, just because I've just finished this piece and I've been sort of processing it a lot, he's not a very good wicket taker on strike rate compared to other bowlers, which is such a fascinating thing, because I think you could watch Stuart Broad for like 8 test matches and say to all your friends, why are you all going on about this guy? He doesn't do anything. And then you miss the 9th test match and he takes like 8 for 12 or something. And you're just like, and I didn't even, did someone have the highlights of it? And when you see a spell like that from Stuart Broad, and he did it in mini spells and major spells, it just feels like he's going to take a wicket every ball. And Jimmy Anderson and Dale Steyn, both far better bowlers than him. Pat Cummins a far better bowler than him. It's very rare, I think, they're going to take a wicket every ball. But I covered the majority of Stuart Broad's career, almost from the very beginning. There were so many times where I was just like, I don't know how he's not going to get a wicket, which just means that, a little bit like I always said that my favorite batter was, the cricketer that it's interested me the most during my career was Brendan McCullum. And it wasn't that Brendan McCullum was the best batter. It was that when Brendan McCullum was being Brendan McCullum, you did not want to miss a single ball. And I think Broad was very, very similar to that when he was at his absolute best.
Yeah, I mean, he's had his moments, right? I think you make a very fair point that he really knew how to work that media game and also the social media game.
And the crowd.
Dropped.
All 3.
Yeah, and the crowd. Absolutely. And that's why he has so many songs, of course. And, whether it be, what's it called? The many instances that he's involved himself, like if he gets dropped, he'll be vocal about it. And then, I mean, if you start with the 6 sixes that Yuvraj hit him for, and all that he's achieved since then, of course, that 100 versus Pakistan, then his ability to pick those wickets in clusters, even though those clusters might be far apart, I guess, because the strike rate is 55.
Yeah, I mean, think about this. You talk about the 6 sixes. He went for the 6 sixes, and then a decade later, he went for the most runs ever in a test match over. Right? He also lost 2 games against the Netherlands. Once when he was bowling, and he bowled a fantastic over, but couldn't stop fumbling the ball, and Netherlands stole the game. And then he captained and lost against the Netherlands as well. There's so much sort of failure in his career. And yet, only 2 seamers have ever taken over 600 wickets. And I'm sure we'll do a whole episode on him at one stage because he is that fascinating. But you start to break all this sort of stuff down, and people will say things like, "Wow, his dad was a cricketer. He went to a nice school. He played in the most professional cricket system that had ever existed. They played more tests than anyone else. And you're like, yeah, that's all fair. He still took 600 wickets in test match cricket. And England basically tried to kill him and Anderson by the amount of tests they made them play, while they were also trying to keep them alive. It was almost, it's a bit like you're trying to drain all the life force out of someone, but leave their pulse going. And that's kind of what it was at time. For them to do what they did and Anderson, might add a couple more, but for them to do what they've done so far anyway, is just amazing. And there are lots of caveats over his career and where he fits into the all-time greats, because there's, and that's what the piece that I've just done is about. But realistically, what just a ridiculous career. We have never seen a career like Stuart Broad's before, and we probably won't again.
Yeah, given the way cricket is headed. And I mean, anyone who has witnessed Trent Bridge 2015, that is a spell that you just do not forget. That's just the impact of how good he was at his very best. And, 3,000 plus runs with the bat. I think it's very fitting that Stuart Broad ended his batting career with a 6. Of course, the Nighthawk, wouldn't expect anything less. And then got 2 wickets and a wicket off his final delivery with the ball as well. So I think a very, very fitting and a very fairy tale sort of script that was written for him. But not the only English cricketer who said farewell to Test cricket today, of course, in the aftermath of England's win. Moeen Ali, of course, we had suspected that he might not play any further Test cricket after this. He has confirmed that and said that, if Ben Stokes messages him again, he's just going to delete the message, which was, I thought that was hilarious. But again, a fantastic character who has played a big role with respect to, motivating and inspiring, especially South Asians who are also, Britishers of South Asian descent. I think he has played a massive role over there. And today, the way he ripped the ball and got those crucial wickets after the rain delay, I think he should have gotten Smith, let's be honest. Stokes kind of did a Herschel Gibbs over there, but he still got you Travis Head. And who was the other guy he got right after that? Mitch Marsh. I think
he got Mitch Marsh.
Yeah, and then he also
did he get Cummins later as well? I think he got a few.
Yes,
didn't he?
He
Yeah.
did. Yeah,
no, I thought he bowled really
Slip.
well. He in the first innings, or was it yesterday? I'm trying to remember all my days.
Also really handy with the bat. Had a broken groin, very, very,
broken groin. I love that. I don't know if you could break your groin, but it was definitely broken. It wasn't a fixed groin. I think we can suggest that. He bowled like he does. There were times in this Test match where I was like, oh my God, that's such a bad ball for a Test cricketer to bowl. And then there were plenty of others where I thought he bowled fantastic. And that's kind of what he was. We just did a big podcast on him recently. I did the big video on him. He isn't a frontline spinner, but he kind of made himself into someone who could bowl frontline spin deliveries, absolutely ragging the ball. As you said, made some runs as well, batting at first drop, or when he wasn't really supposed to, he probably didn't want to. Look, he's a fascinating cricketer because he probably, at the age of, 23, 24, whenever it was, wasn't thought of as an international cricketer, was thought of as someone who probably would have a very good first-class career, was a specialist batter up until roughly that age, mucking around with spin in the nets, and to go from that to bowling international spin for 10 years and batting every single position in the order that England would allow him to. And then even things like this, right? Like retiring, getting the call. He could have said no.
Yeah.
It could have gone a lot worse. I mean, it almost did. Edgbaston with his finger and everything else. Like there were times when you're like, oh God, they've made a mistake. But he really did pull it back. And I thought by the end of the series, he was bowling well. I mean, on this wicket, I think he just had to put the ball in the right area. I think there was enough there. It was a good wicket for spin by that point. Although, having said that, Joe Root didn't bowl as well as he could have in that situation. But yeah, it's a fantastic story for so many different reasons. Also, look, I don't want to get too bogged down in all this sort of nonsense, but I think Moeen Ali is a genuinely nice person, and I think he will go on to do. This is not a slight on someone like Stuart Broad. Stuart Broad is Stuart Broad. Stuart Broad will hopefully go on to be a very good commentator in the box and have a positive impact on cricket going ahead. But I feel like Moeen Ali is the sort of person who will really, he'll almost put the positive impact thing first, right?
Are you saying that Moeen Ali is Barbie and Stuart Broad is Oppenheimer? Is that where you're going with this?
Well, I don't know how Stuart Broad could ever not be Barbie. I don't know how. I think that used to be his nickname, didn't it? I know he was called Baywatch in Australia. Maybe he was called Barbie as well. But maybe I've got a feeling someone
Well,
called him
Jimmy
Barbie.
Anderson is probably Oppenheimer if you really come to think of it. But Moeen
Oh,
Ali
yeah.
is also definitely Barbie.
I'm gonna have to be thinking about that one for a while. But
Okay.
they are very, very different people from that perspective.
Mm.
And it'd be really interesting to see what Moeen Ali does next.
Yeah. And of course, he's a Birmingham boy, and he wasn't the only Birmingham boy who won England this test match. And Chris Woakes, I would just have to say that if there was one cricketer within that English team who deserved that England Player of the Series award, it had to be him, because he got 19 wickets at 18 apiece, only played 3 test matches, and the 3 test matches he played in, England were the dominant team by and large. And the way he was getting the ball to hoop today, I don't think any of England's paces, maybe Broad towards the end, perhaps, but the way he was getting that prodigious movement, it was just so amazing to watch. And then he got 4 in this in this innings, combined for 7 wickets with Moeen, played a titular role or pivotal role in England's victory. I think that Chris Woakes, if he has got another 2-3 seasons in him, he should be playing every test match that England play in England, wouldn't you say?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think the problem has ever been him in England, right? So
Mm.
I thought he bowled sensationally. I can't remember who it was. Someone tweeted, it might have been Ian Higgins from the Great Cricketer, tweeted that if he'd played all 5 tests, England just would have won the series. And I still think Tongue should have played more as well. So
Mm.
they did have certainly some more firepower that wasn't even used. I think with Woakes, it's going to be really interesting now that he becomes the second senior bowler, right? Like, where does that go? How does that affect him? I don't think we've seen the best of him in international level. I think we've seen the best of him with the ball for in England conditions, but I don't think we've seen the best of him, internationally. Do they feel confident enough to take him on tours? Do they not? Do they just keep him for home, as you said? I think they have enough bowlers at home. What they really want is, let's say Anderson is done. And I'm not saying he is, but let's just say he is. They're going to need one guy like Woakes. Ollie Robinson's a fantastic bowler. I'm a huge fan of him. I don't know if his bowling is going to be as helpful on flat pitches overseas, where Woakes can still bowl short pitching, spells, and has a little bit more speed and something to him, and can bowl back of a length and all those different things that Ollie Robinson can really just bowl.
Well, I mean,
Ollie Robinson.
Robinson did get it to reverse in Pakistan on those baseball friendly surfaces, so he really bent his back over there. He has.
Well, I almost think that Robinson might be, he might be the better Asian bowler. But I mean, if they have Robinson and Woakes, one of them really has to work overseas. Because I just don't see the point. Like, if you put Matthew Potts in the England team, he's a fantastic bowler and he can bowl at home. And I think he translates better overseas, perhaps, than some of the other guys will, although we haven't seen enough of it to be positive of that. They need to find guys who can bowl away from home. And that's what Woakes just makes it all more confusing, right? Like, of how that works. But I don't think the average fan understands how talented Chris Woakes is. He's a limited batter, but a very, very good limited batter, if that makes sense.
Good enough to win them that test match, the third one, right?
He
played an imperative role.
I actually think we haven't seen the best of his batting. Certainly don't think we've seen the best of him bowling away from home. I don't really understand his record away from home, because it should just be better. Even if it's bad, it should be better than it is. But he's a fantastically talented cricketer. As you said, a couple more years. I mean, if they could get 3 more years out of him, and they get, I remember when McGrath and Gillespie and Warne left the Australian team, and Brett Lee had, I think I want to say in 9 test matches, took something like 57 wickets or something remarkable. And it was the first time he was kind of like on his own, right? And had to be the main bowler. It's a very different thing. And it happened really late in his career. And unfortunately, Australia never got the most out of Brett Lee, but they got that little period. Chris Woakes is not quite being Brett Lee, because I don't think he's been as consistently in the side as Brett Lee ever was. But again, just a fantastically talented cricketer. If they could get anything out of him for the next 3 years, because it's going to be a weird time. We don't know how Ollie Robinson's fitness will hold up. We don't know if Jofra Archer will ever play again. Tongue would, we don't really know what who was the other one I said before? Potts. We don't really know how those guys are going to go. Wood was injured today. He was bowling at your pace today, right?
Yeah. So very sore heel.
Yeah.
You could tell.
And I mean, a sore heel, I'm sure he has a sore heel. I'm not saying that that's a lie, but it's just like he's buggered, is what you mean. He's absolutely knackered because you've overbowled him, and he wasn't expecting to play 3 tests in a row. He doesn't know how to play 3 tests in a row, and this is what Mark Wood is.
And then those 3 tests in a row were in quick succession because of the 100, and that's an entirely different conversation.
Exactly, and so Mark Wood's suddenly in this random situation, and he's not handling it as well physically as he probably should be able to. But these are all the things that happen. You take Broad out, you eventually take Anderson out. How does this all fit together? It's a real interesting time from Chris Woakes' perspective, but also all of England perspective.
Yeah, and I personally think that if maybe they can somehow figure out a way to play both Woakes and Curran, that's going to give them batting depth. And then Sam Curran has the whole left arm thing going for him. Maybe that could be a potential ploy for England. But I can tell you that Pakistan fans for sure will know how good Chris Woakes is with the bat because he's tormented them quite a few times.
Yeah, he's made a lot of runs against them.
Yeah. Remember that series, the Misbah Alistair Cook series 2-2?
I saw him make a 50 at the MCG. I want to say it was in a T20 game. I think that's right. And I just remember it was quite early on, and I'd seen him play for Warwickshire, and I was thinking, wow, if this guy gets it all together. Now, after that, we worked out he couldn't play the short ball very well, and you could play on his patience sometimes when you're bowling to him and everything else. But there's still more than enough latent talent to average between 25 and 31 batting at probably number 7, but maybe number 8, probably more likely number 8. He's just, as I said, he's a fantastic cricketer. And look, both of these teams have so many aging concerns of where they go next, and the whole Bairstow issue for England of what they do with Bairstow going ahead. Australia might need 2 openers by the end of this summer. There are already rumors that Steve Smith is thinking about retirement as well. Mitchell Stark is 34. Both of these teams are. What we saw was McCullum bringing together the best of England to take on the best of Australia over the last couple of years. But, the players that are backing them up are not of that level, right? Like who's Australia's openers? If both the openers disappear, is it Renshaw and Harris? Is it Renshaw and Bancroft? That's not Usman Khawaja and David Warner.
Bancroft is coming back then, you think?
Well, we don't know. It might be him. It might be... that's the point. Whoever comes back is going to be...
Will Pukovski? Where's he at?
He's playing club cricket.
Concussion situation over?
He's playing club cricket in England at the moment.
Okay.
For Weybridge, I think, which is a club that pays a lot of money. Will Pukovski's still a chance, to be fair. Yeah. But the point is that the openers are probably going to be Bancroft, Harris, or Renshaw. Well, Bancroft and Harris have both had a couple of chances each and not made it.
Yeah.
Renshaw's slightly different because he was picked when he was very young. I think he's a much better player now and deserves another go. But again, it's another guy who came in and disappeared. It's not Warner and Khawaja.
Yeah, it's absolutely not Warner Khawaja, who, by the way, had a great test match, right? Even though Australia ended up losing, but Warner ended his Ashes career on a high, scoring that 50, not getting out to Broad. And Khawaja, and here's an interesting one. So Khawaja and Zach Crawley, they both ended up as the leading run scorers in this Ashes, which is quite remarkable because they're both openers. And in a 5-test match series in England, you generally think that is not possible given the conditions. But Khawaja has 496 runs. Zach Crawley has 480 runs. They both got 70s in this test as well at the Oval. And if you look at the balls played, Usman Khawaja has played about 120 more overs than Zach Crawley, and his strike rate is less than 40. Zach Crawley's strike rate is touching 90. So the contrasting styles of both these openers and the fact that they're at the top of the pile, I am quite mind blown with all of this. What about you?
Well, I think, what did Duckett end up scoring as well? 350, 400 maybe as well. I can't remember what his final total was. But you look at it, and three of the four openers made runs. As you said, it's not a traditional way of going about it. I still think Australia struggle in England with that sort of first 10 over period. They don't really have a solid plan. And on top of that, Crawley and Duckett came for them, and they didn't know how to handle those two. But I've seen them bowl in England enough to be like, I'm not sure they quite work. They're fine when the Duke starts moving around, but they're not sure always what to do before that. And in Khawaja's case, I think Khawaja's is in great form. And every time he's in great form, when the pitch suits him, it's very hard to dismiss him. Right. So you saw in the pitches when they didn't suit him as much, right? With anything with too much lateral movement, Khawaja didn't look like anything. The minute you took away a little bit of that lateral movement, you're like, how are you going to get him out, right? You need the whole Ollie Robertson thing happening, like at Edgbaston, to be able to get him out, or the short ball at Lords or something like that.
Right.
And so they're all different cases. All three of them are different cases. But it is a really, really interesting thing. It's not something that we normally see. And I mean, Khawaja's at the moment, by far the best of those three players, but Duckett and Crawley still have questions over them. And even Khawaja, he was never a complete batter. So it's interesting that they are the three that sort of had, I don't know if you'd say the biggest impact, but certainly, as you said, were, openers, leading run scorers in England isn't a thing that you would normally see, especially in a low scoring series. Usually it's the openers that are cannon fodder in a low scoring series. If everyone's scoring like 600 runs, you might expect the openers to do well.
I mean, I would actually have expected that Joe Root would have finished at the top of this run table, because he was in prolific form since quite a few years. And I mean, if you really think about it, look at the 84 when he was dismissed on 84 in the previous test and on 91 in this test. Both of those balls were the two lowest deliveries in the entire Ashes. They just did not rise at all. And you've got to say that's like terrible luck for Joe Root.
No, definitely. I mean, look, he's fantastic. He has struggled against Australia and England, if I'm not, or is it in both countries? I can't remember now. But his record in the Ashes is maybe not as good as it is against some other.
Great at conversion, so he'd get those 50s, but wouldn't get those tons.
But I think that was against everyone. I don't think that was just Australia. Whereas I think specifically, I'd have to look up his record. But as good as he's been, I don't think Australia has seen consistently the best of Joe Root. Obviously, the Edgbaston knock was fantastic. And there were some other very good knocks in this series as well that some of them were cruelly undone. But I don't think Australia's always seen the best of him in a way that England has seen the best of Steve Smith, right? They've run face first into Steve Smith many, many different times. But yeah, you would expect Smith, Labuschagne, Warner, and not Warner, sorry, Smith, Labuschagne, Root, to be your top scorers, and it wasn't that kind of series, weirdly, at the end.
Yeah, weirdly. And I mean, Steve Smith should be considering himself very, very lucky that he even got those twin 50s in this test match, because I'm not sure what your take is on the run out in the first innings. That wasn't a run out because the bail was slightly dislodged by Bairstow's glove, and then the other bail was dislodged later. And then the catch, of course, but that was not out for me. That was a Herschel Gibbs by Ben Stokes. And I think he also knew, you could tell by his expressions. But Steve Smith, quite hot and cold this series, you'd have to say.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just on the two decisions, I definitely think that the first one, I don't think the umpire could have given that out, just because even if Bairstow had just brushed the stump, it does look like the stump moves a little bit at that point, and there's no way the umpire can tell you 100% that Bairstow hasn't knocked the bail, and then he obviously takes it off altogether. Sky seemed to get that one wrong on the TV. They seem to be focusing on the wrong things, but the very basic thing had to be that once the hand touched the glove, and I think Dinesh Karthik was perfect with this. He just said he got himself in the wrong position. He was trying to take the ball in front of the stumps, but he was standing behind them. But yeah, it was. I think that one was only controversial because the commentary didn't quite match what the umpire was looking for, unless I'm misreading it. But that's how I saw it. And then the other one was, I thought it was obvious. I mean, the ridiculousness of the other one, of course, is that England, after doing so well in the Moral Ashes, Bayram, all the way through, just cruising in the Moral Ashes, suddenly just make the biggest dick move of all time, where
the ball,
clearly he drops the catch, right?
Yeah.
And then he knows he's dropped the catch. And what I would say is, I've watched this a lot of times. I didn't end up having to write about it, but I did watch it a lot of times. The only player who's watching him is Harry Brook. Because what happens is when he takes the catch, everyone else turns to the umpire to appeal or starts to charge in thinking it's out. And so they don't know what Stokes has done. And so I think Bairstow is facing the umpire. He's the one saying to Stokes, you have to review this. You have to review this. And you can see on Stokes' face, he doesn't want to review it because he knows he's dropped it. Yet he reviews it anyway. And you're just like, well, wait a minute. Did we really go through Alex Carey's whole week for you guys to have your captain drop the ball and know he's dropped it? There's like 4 angles, 4 different facial expressions of him going, I can't believe I've dropped this. You can just see it on his face. I cannot believe I've dropped this. And then review it anyway? What are we talking about? It just shows you how ridiculous. And this is why these sorts of moments piss me off so much.
Hmm.
And I'll go even more. So I had an Australian friend WhatsApp me go, I hope you're going to write about the changing balls. You know, they changed the ball and the ball swung around more. And I went, yeah, sometimes that happens. Sometimes you change a ball and you get a crapper ball and it does absolutely nothing. I said, sometimes the umpires make a mistake, which maybe in this case they have. But sometimes they make a mistake in the other direction where you have a newish ball and they replace it with an old ball. Right?
Yeah.
And so everyone gets so fascinated because it's about our team. It's not about our team. Ben Stokes went to take a catch. He dropped it. And he should have just said, lads, I've dropped it. It's almost like he didn't want to admit to the team that he'd made that mistake. And Harry Brooks seemed to, Harry Brooks fascinating through all this because Harry Brooks is the one who should have said, guys, we can't review this because Ben Stokes has dropped it. But if you watch Harry Brooks, he doesn't even seem to recognize that Ben Stokes has dropped it. He just picks it up casually as if to go, great, we've got a catch. Let's go, fellas. The whole thing was so absolutely remarkable. So, no, I think in both those cases, Steve Smith probably should have been not out. But, you know, I'm sure there will be angry people in the comments, as there are in all parts of the world at all times.
There are angry people everywhere. And just a bit on Harry Brook, and when Stokes dropped it, the way Harry Brook reached for the ball is the way I reach for the sofa when I'm, or the remote control for the television when I'm like lounging on the sofa or whatever. It was hilarious. But
it wasn't. Well, I mean, I just want to go on that because if Harry Brook was really paying attention, he might have actually reacted in a way to try and take the catch. Yeah. I don't think he ever would have got near it because when it hits Stokes' knee and it sort of goes down. But if he'd been paying attention, he might have reacted. But he was so blasé about it. It was, as you said, like it was almost like he was just picking it up to throw it to the umpire because the catch had been taken. But it hadn't actually factored into his brain that Stokes had dropped the ball at that point. It was, and Jeff Lemon did SEN. They put the commentary out. Jeff Lemon doesn't notice the drop at all. I didn't notice the drop in the ground at all. I had Rory Dollard next to me because I was saying originally, well, I don't think he's hit that. I didn't realize it was glove at that point, but I was like, I don't think he's hit that. So I was looking at that, but it just shows it just wasn't an obvious thing. You can see why the England players weren't fascinated on it either. Everyone was looking to the glove, the bat, the umpire. The catch was the easy bit, right?
Yeah, supposedly. I mean, speaking of the moral ashes, I mean, the ball thing did cause a bit of an uproar when they changed the ball. And of course, England started to make it
not
talk.
That England had anything to do with that, of course. England didn't pick the ball. The umpires did.
Of course not. But Punter was unimpressed, really. I mean, he wants an investigation to go through. So we'll see what happens with that regard. But I can't not talk about Johnny Bairstow and talk like whilst talking about the moral ashes because he's just become the centerpiece for it. It's interesting. His form actually picked up towards the end. And today he caught that catch like, you know, he was catching a fish with his hand or like swatting a fly or something like that successfully. It's quite remarkable how, you know, we've seen the best of Bairstow, you could say, and the worst of Bairstow. Yeah. I'm not quite sure what's in store for Bairstow. Like, where does he go from here?
So there were so many. So it's the end of the test, and so many of the publications do their ratings, you know, which is something I've skipped doing pretty much my entire career. I think I might have had to do it once for Cricket Info, and I probably gave the wrong marks on purpose, so I never had to do it again. And Bairstow was one of the ones that no one really knew where to go with it, right? Like he ended up having a decent series with the bat, you know. He was terrible with the gloves, and like even today, like he takes those catches. But he had some absolute howlers off easy takes, right? Like, and what happens with wicketkeeping is that your wicketkeeper can fumble like 8 balls, right? But take every catch, and people go, "Oh, look at these catches he took." I'm uninterested in how many catches someone takes. If they've already fumbled a bunch of other balls before that, any one of those could have been an edge, right? And so I've never understood the way that people think about it from that point of view. I mean, I think there's a lot of questions for England. If Anderson and Broad go and they don't have the bowling attack that they had, the dependability of the bowling attack, how long does McCullum stay?
Yeah.
Right? Suddenly that job gets a lot harder, right? You've got the Bairstow question. They clearly have backed Bairstow, but he's about to go to India now.
Yeah.
He's going to be expected to make a lot more runs.
Good luck keeping on those tracks.
Exactly. If we have the sort of Indian tracks we've had over the last, whatever it is, 3 or 4 years, and I have no reason to believe that they won't do that, especially against a ball, like it would make sense. He's going to really struggle on those pitches, right? So they don't have a frontline spinner unless Leach comes back, and even then they might have one spinner en route. That's probably not going to be enough to go up against Akshar, Jadeja, and Ashwin, right? So how Bairstow fits into all that is really fascinating. You talked about Sam Curran playing for them before. I mean, yeah, he might have to, right? Like if Ben Stokes can't bowl anymore, so unless he bowls off spin, which sadly he did not have to do today, but the whole thing's so weird. I don't know how it all fits together.
Yeah, it definitely is. And I mean, I think it was quite ironic that Stokes actually came out to bat at 3, because we were discussing this in the previous podcast. And you spoke of, the Bairstow fumbles. I think he rubbed off a bit on Alex Carey in this test match. He was having a perfect Ashes behind the stumps. And then he dropped Harry Brook. Of course, Australia dropped a bunch of English catches in the first innings, like 4, I guess, in the slips and everything. Brook went on to get 86. And in hindsight, if you look at all of that, given that Australia got super close to England in the end, you could say that their fielding cost them over here.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It was a scrappy series at times, and I think that if you were to go back through, you would find so many different situations when things swung in each team's direction, quite literally at sometimes. And it just was that kind of series. It was. I think England is probably still not quite as good as Australia as a team. They might be better strategically. And they are sort of playing a game that matches up very well against Australia. Then Australia were trying to use their natural talent, but maybe weren't being as smart. It was kind of just scrappier than it needed to be. And so there were like a million half moments that I'm sure you could pull out. Like, someone was saying today, what would have happened at Edgbaston if Ben Stokes had been fully fit and that catch had gone up over his head, right? I still don't think he necessarily catches it, but these are all fair questions to look at all the way through the series, just because it was so close and there were so many micro moments that could have changed everything.
Yeah, I think scrappy is the right adjective to describe this. One last thought on Australia. 14 wickets in this test were taken by Mitchell Starc and Todd Murphy. Murphy took 6 and Mitchell Starc took 4 each in each innings to end up with 8. Now, we saw the importance of a spinner, especially in this Australian attack, because they were out of all sorts, in Manchester, in Old Trafford. And Murphy came, and not only did he add valuable runs with the bat, but I think he bowled quite well. And Mitchell Starc, here's someone that we were talking or discussing that he might be past his prime in Test cricket, right? And all of a sudden, he comes in and plays a wonderful Ashes, ends up as the player of the series for Australia. And this is a guy who, he's not that young anymore. But still, he found ways to trouble England big time. And I had a cousin who was at the Oval watching this test, and he said that Stark's deliveries it's so ferocious, you can't actually spot the ball when you're in the crowd. So your thoughts on these two superstars and the future for both? Because Mitchell Starc is coming towards the end of his career. He might want a good paycheck out of it at the end as well, maybe playing some franchise cricket. But he's expressed his desire to play 100 test matches for Australia. And then with Todd Murphy, you're kind of passing on that baton from Nathan Lyon to this new kid who kind of looks the part from what we've seen thus far.
Yeah, I mean, with Murphy, there's no hurry. I don't think, as long as Lyon's body comes back. Lyon was, such a consistent player. Like, he just doesn't miss games, right? So I don't think there's any huge hurry there with Murphy. You keep him as his backup and play both of them together in Asia occasionally, and Murphy travels around the world, so you get him to play in some tour games and he gets used to all those sorts of situations. I've got absolutely no problem with that. I still think he has high upside. I was more impressed with him maybe bowling at the Oval than I have been at other times in this series. Well, he only played one of the tests, didn't he? But I thought he was a little bit better at times here. But I also didn't see anything to be like, oh, we need to replace Lyon straight away. There's no reason for that. On Starc, I just think it's as simple as, it's what I keep saying over and over again. You get a wobble ball and you become a much more interesting bowler. And, he couldn't master the traditional wobble ball. He's gone with the 3/4 seam one. Mohammad Siraj and Tim Southey and Kyle Mills. I think it was Kyle Mills who invented that one, or at least, perfected it. him with the ability to move the ball laterally off the pitch is just a whole different beast, right? He can still bowl short. He can still reverse swing it. He'll still swing it up front. He's still got plenty of bounce. He's still got plenty of pace. Was it your cousin or your friend? Who was at the ground?
My cousin went there, and I think he
cousin?
witnessed that delivery that got rid of Stokes, that absolute corker. I mean, I think that was ultimately, if I have to look at all the balls in this series, that one definitely ends up in my top 3. Has to.
So he still has all those balls, right? The problem with Stark as a test match bowler is, what did he do when there was no pace and bounce, when there was no swing? And he didn't really have a B game. He doesn't have a length. He doesn't really probe in any sort of traditional way. Giving him this ball gives him 2 things. A, it makes him find a better line and length, because he that ball has to be hitting the top of middle and off stump regularly. Otherwise, it's not that useful a delivery to left-handers. Obviously, the right-handers, it allows him to bowl around the wicket, which is another big advantage. But the other thing is, it just allows him to do something in those big gaps, and might only be one other spell, but that one other spell at his pace, with the ability to move the ball like that, should be regular wickets. It may not be huge amounts of wickets, but we saw in Headingley took 2 wickets with that ball. And we certainly saw other wickets in this series where he bowled it as well. Now, the question of, he's 34. I think he's 34. I think that's right. I think he's 34, Hazelwood's 32, and Cummins is 30. I think I've got all those ones correct.
I think so.
As you said, wants to play 100 tests. He looks more likely to play 100 tests now than he did at the start of the Ashes, where I didn't think he'd even play that much or have a big part of it. But the other side of it is, if he played in the IPL and he played in Major League Cricket and he played in South Africa or whatever, he really, if he goes back to being the white ball bowler he once was, and I don't think there's any reason why he can't do that. If he goes back to being that bowler, he's probably worth more now in those competitions than he is in Test cricket, and he's going to maybe double or triple the last couple of years of his life. I mean, he's a phenomenal athlete. He doesn't seem to be showing any signs of tiring. If you're going to say which one looks like they're going to tire the first out of those 3, it looks like it's Hazelwood at the moment.
I was going to say.
So, that will be very interesting. But I couldn't be more impressed by Mitchell Starc this Ashes.
Absolutely, I would 100% concur. And I mean, he has an ODI World Cup to look forward to now, which is, I think, his best format. But anyway, lots and lots of stuff on the Ashes. We're going to head towards India versus the West Indies after this break. This is Behram Qazi, and with me is Jared Cumber. You're watching Uncovered. We'll be back shortly.
I know that you think you could run your favourite cricket team better than those who do, but no one is going to let you do that. So why not try Wicket Cricket Manager to satisfy that urge? Pick your nation, pick your league, pick your players, and yell at them when they do poorly. You can find it in the links below or by searching for Wicket Cricket Manager in your app store today.
Your support is invaluable to us, so smash that subscribe button like a fast bowler back of a length. Or you could leave a comment, something along the lines of, "Wow, Jared, you're one hell of a swinger." Furthermore, help us reach more people by sharing our work on social media, supporting us on Patreon, or sending live super chats.
Welcome back to Uncovered. This is Behram Qazi, and with me is Jared Kimber. And just before we get into India versus West Indies, I just want to say that Wicket Cricket Manager is pretty much the best game you could download on your phone. And this is
I got relegated.
Oh, no way. I won the Champions League. I made it.
No, I had a shocker. I kept playing it like in little bits where I wasn't focusing on it, and then I didn't realize I'd lost so many games in a row. I had a shocker.
Yeah, no, I took my time in Division 1, and it took me a few seasons to actually get to the Champions League, but I won it on the first attempt, and I couldn't be happier. So yeah, I'm not saying this, guys, just because it pays my bills and it's our sponsor, but you really should download this game, and we have a whole support group going on for it as well, so we can help you. Anyway, moving on to West Indies versus India. India won the first ODI. They bowled West Indies out super cheaply and then didn't chase it as easily. They lost 5 wickets. But more importantly, in the second ODI, West Indies beat India very, very comfortably. They rolled them over for 180 odd and chased it down with 6 wickets in hand. And Jared, Barbados wouldn't have been able to beat India now, would they?
I think they would have struggled. Struggled to do it. It is hilarious, isn't it? Where not that far removed from West Indies shouldn't be playing at all, and they've had a draw and now won a game.
Yeah,
just
it's
kind of shows you
hilarious.
how ridiculous it all is. Especially as they won a game with probably their best limited overs, but one of the two best limited overs batters, getting man of the match in the Major League final in America at the same time, right? So the whole thing is so ridiculous. But yes, it was, from an Indian point of view, this is the sort of, I wrote, made this huge video project at the end of the World Cup. These are the sorts of games that Indian fans shouldn't worry about.
Yeah,
because it's okay to lose when you rest your players. Rahul Dravid needs to find out what all the different players can do. He needs to know what the support players can do. And also, if they're going to play a more attacking brand of cricket all the way through, at least in the short term, that should mean that they should lose a few more games until they work out the best way of doing it. But from the West Indies point of view, that's a good win against the good 11, right? Like, we don't know how much more ODI cricket they got to play at this rate. We don't really know where their headspace is with everything. But if you've got your, I don't know what you would call it, but not quite your full strength team because of, things like Puran and everything else, and you're still putting up performances like this, it's not quite time to turn the lights out at the very least. And put it this way, there are teams in the World Cup at the moment that I'm not sure could have won that game. And I think that's an important thing for the West Indies to remember, that instead of just ditching everything and starting again, that you're in a position to do it from that you still have the talent available to you and you can still put it together.
Yeah, and one real positive for them was that Shai Hope is now batting in the middle order. He got runs in both of those games, and he got them at a very good strike rate as well, almost run a ball, 40 odd in the first one, a match-winning 60-something in the second.
Was it run a
This
ball?
Is quite surprising, isn't
was it a strike rate of about 85?
I think it was closer to run a ball, but that's still, even 85 is a big step up for Shai Hope, no?
I'm going to look it up because I need to know now. Low-scoring games are kind of what he should be great at, right? So even Australia even had this with Hussey. India had it with MS Dhoni. They're both better players than Shai Hope, but it's the same sort of thing, that those sorts of guys, I always said one of the best players in the world in T20 cricket was a guy called Michael Klinger, not because he was a fantastic player, but because in a low-scoring game, he just was going to be good every time. And he got teams over in tricky chases and everything else. But if one team makes 240, Michael Klinger might as well not be playing, right? he just doesn't have that. And look, in this situation, I would say that Shai Hope was obviously very handy, but it's the best situation for someone like him to shine in. And am I filling time to have a look at his strike rate? 78 strike rate. I told you. What are you talking about?
Oh, well.
I mean, it's still up for him, probably. I think his career strike rate might be lower. But the point is that those sorts of middling chases, lower chases, tricky chases, dodgy games, pitches, because it wasn't a great pitch, right? Like those sorts of situations are what Shai Hope is great at. So from that point of view, I think they should be really excited. I saw a little bit of Carty playing. I'd like to see more of him, and I'm trying to remember who's the bowler.
Good against Moti, maybe.
Yes,
he did
yes.
Really.
So am I remembering? He was injured for the test? They were going to pick him for the test.
And earlier in the year, he took a 7-for in a test match as well.
Yep.
So he like the sort of player who could represent West Indies across formats. And this is quite a welcome sign, because I think ever since maybe Devendra Bishu or Suleiman Ben, they haven't had a reliable spinner. Even those guys, you could say, weren't super reliable. But this is quite a welcome sign for the West Indies.
Yeah, I mean, Narayan's really the only thing they've had. They've had Shane Shillingfords and Rakeem Cornwall and Solomon Ben.
Well, Narayan never really broke it in tests, did he? I think he must have played.
I think he had one or two decent tests, but he didn't. I think he played like 7 or 8. And I don't think he ended up with a good average. Although I think he was starting to work it out at the time when he stopped playing. But the point is that they just really haven't had anyone, right? They've had those Nikita Miller, Jamal Warrican type guys who just absolutely dominate domestic cricket and then just don't look like they're at international level. Hey, if I'm not mistaken, he's not young, is he? Let's have a look now. Yeah, he's 28. Yeah,
he's been around in the CPL for a while. I think he represents Guyana, if I'm not wrong.
Yeah. So he's played 40 games and got a first class average of 21. I know that sounds great, but there is a lot of spinners in the Caribbean in first class cricket who have these ridiculous numbers. Can hold a bat a little bit as well. Look, I think he's a really, really interesting one. I think at a certain point too, you kind of like a spinner who does well against India or Sri Lanka or Pakistan, just from we see lots of spinners who might do well on wickets that suit them against Western teams when, people are going hard at them and everything else. But in these sorts of situations, I always think that's a slightly better, outcome if they could do that. Not that that means he's suddenly going to go to India and take 15 wickets in a test match or anything like that, but just that when players are slightly sharper on their feet, they're not just reverse sweeping everything. If you have the tools to be able to handle someone who can come forward, can come back, can manipulate you, I always think that's a very, very good sign. So, yeah, he's a really interesting one going ahead.
Absolutely. And I mean, I hope he has a good career for the West Indies because they really need some inspiration right now. Coming to India, of course, in the second ODI, Kohli and Rohit both did not play. And you can say that India have played in the past where both of these guys haven't featured and they've done well. But they didn't even pick Jaiswal for this ODI series, which kind of surprised me because, I mean, you need to have your up and coming young superstars if you are to rest those two big guys. So, I mean, do you think that India are prepared for life without Kohli and Rohit?
Yeah, because I'm not sure I'd pick either of them in limited overs cricket. Especially now, like they're both fantastic players still, but I'm not sure that that's where I'd be putting my money. I'd probably Kohli for one-day cricket. But if you're just talking purely on batting, I'm not sure that Rohit would be in my one-day side. So I'm not too worried about that. I thought it was more interesting that they went with Akshar Patel at 4. I'm trying to think of what the batting order was. Where would he have come otherwise? 8. I've seen them try this a little bit.
Below Sky for sure.
Yeah, so Sky batted at 6, didn't he? I think that's right. Sanju Samson getting another chance as well. I don't. Maybe Akshar was just pinch hitting, but I have seen them try him a little bit. They do seem to think slightly more of his batting than I think I do. I actually think he works really well down the order, but I'm not sure he has the flexibility to go up the top. But what I do like is that they're trying things, right?
Yeah.
Sanju Samson at 3, Akshar Patel at 4. Moving Sky down the order, right? All those sorts of things I think are healthy choices to make before a World Cup. See how things go. I think there was one thing that bothered me about their game, and I didn't watch that much. So Umran Malik bowled 3 overs for 27. I would have liked to have seen him come back because if they were going to lose that game anyway, I would have loved to see him come back just to see how he came back. Right? Like that's what that game should have been for in the end of the day. And so, yeah, I'm not too worried about that at all. But yeah, it's I don't think this means that India is not going to win the World Cup or anything like that. I saw some Indian fans a bit upset about it, but they didn't. I think they handled it okay. I mean, that's one good thing about losing to India in the middle of the night, right? And the early morning is you're not going to see as much of it.
Yeah, I suppose so. It's interesting, actually, the whole wicketkeeper situation because KL Rahul is injured and you've got Ishan Kishan and Sanju Samson. And even though Sanju is, you could say, perhaps more experienced, but Ishan Kishan has played more cricket for India of late and he opens lots of questions over there with respect to what that top order might look like for India. So I think they have a few things still to sort out. And also, one more thing, Jared, Kuldeep Yadav is back. And he had been discarded by India for quite a while. And even though Chahal is also in this squad, he hasn't gotten any game time. And they've gone with Kuldeep and Jadeja and Akshar, which is interesting because that tells me that this is the sort of combination that India might be looking for come World Cup.
Yeah, I think because of the batting of Jadeja and Akshar, they're both spinning the ball away from right-handers. I think that's probably what's doing Chahal out. The interesting thing about Chahal is I had a conversation with Cheyenne the other day who works with us. And he's probably the only 2 natural strike bowlers I think they've produced in India in a long time are probably Umran Malik and Kuldeep Yadav. Now, Umran's probably not going to be ready for this World Cup. Maybe by the next T20 World Cup, he might be. Chahal is ready, but the problem is that if everyone's spinning the ball in the same direction as him and he can't bat, he's in a very awkward situation, I think, from that perspective of, how they fit him in. But he's a fantastic player. But look, Kuldeep, I thought Kuldeep was finished. And I didn't think he was finished because he wasn't talented. But I'd seen enough left-arm wrist spinners come in, have some success, get worked out a little bit, and then they weren't ever the same ever again. he's put on pace in a way that I can't think of a wrist spinner ever improving their pace as much as I've seen with Kuldeep Yadav. And he's done it without really losing, pace. Sorry, without losing spin or bounce or accuracy. And that is absolutely fantastic. And look, left arm rinse spinners are probably the most fun thing in cricket. I won't go on a whole Chuck Fleetwood Smith argument with you, but Chuck Fleetwood Smith was the greatest cricketer of all time. There's no arguments, even if he once took one for 297 in a match and was intentionally bowling head-eye full tosses because he got bored. But they are fantastic to watch and so interesting from that perspective. And, Kuldeep's comeback has been thrilling.
Yeah. And I mean, if I think of left-arm wrist spinners, I instantly think of Paul Adams, and that's probably one of my favorite cricketers growing up. Yeah, and it's interesting because if Bumrah comes back into this team, which I think he might, because they're saying he might play against Ireland, India all of a sudden looks so much more potent. It's just, their whole attack goes from here to here because he's different gravy, Jasprit Bumrah. So it's interesting to see how their planning and, preparation carries on going towards the World Cup. But yeah, we'll take another break. We'll come back and talk about Pakistan versus Sri Lanka. I'm Behram Qazi. This is Jared Kimber.
I think you called me Cumber before. Now you've called me Cover.
I did.
I love this. Let's go for a different sound at the end of everyone.
This is the Unkimbered podcast.
It probably is.
A few years ago, I had a panic attack after ESPN Cricinfo made me their global writer. I'd earned that position, but I also felt like a fraud at the time because I didn't really understand how I wrote. I understand that there was a process and gears and different styles and things, but how it all came together felt a little bit random. And so I began to panic like a golfer with a natural swing, worried one day I'd just end up with the yips. And would my career be over? So I took my writing apart piece by piece until I understood it. And then I figured out I could teach others all the mistakes I had learned. So I started an online course where I tried to make it as cheap as possible so people like me would be able to afford it. It's called Fans with Laptops, and heaps of people from around the world have used it so far, from first-time writers all the way through to professionals trying to improve. I started with a simple plan to make each writer the best they could be. And from the feedback I've received over the years, it seems like the course does that. But after COVID, my career changed. I came to YouTube, started podcasts, wrote emails, and formed a new career on my own going forward. So I now had something else to offer, the multimedia side of things, social media and everything else. Not to mention that I was building everything up as an independent. And so I added all of that to my course. So if you have ever wanted to work in sports as a writer or podcaster or making videos or anything else, Fans with Laptops is the place to start. If you think you qualify as a fan and you have a laptop and you want to work in sport, click on the link.
Hello and welcome back to the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Qazi and this is Jared Kimber. And now we'll be talking about Pakistan's 2-0 whitewash versus Sri Lanka in Sri Lanka, which I think is still quite an achievement, Jared, because I think in Test cricket, when they're playing Test cricket at home, Sri Lanka are probably at their strongest. And even though they're not like the fabled Sri Lankan team of yesteryear, this is still a team that recently beat Australia in a Test match at home and Pakistan in a Test match at home. So to win the series 2-0 versus them and also record the highest ever victory versus Sri Lanka in their backyard in terms of, margin of victory by runs, I think Pakistan can give themselves a pat on the back.
Look, Sri Lanka almost made the World Test Championship final, right?
Yeah.
And they did it without a particularly easy draw or anything from that perspective. So I think beating them is impressive, no matter how you do it at the moment. And I probably wouldn't have said that 2 years ago, but I've thoroughly changed how I think about that. But beating them the way that Pakistan did, I think is almost more important, right? Not just the margin of victory, although obviously that helps, but the style of cricket that they played, it looked like, it's not
a
baseball.
milder version of baseball because
I was wondering if it was maybe a little bit more like what we see with Zimbabwe, right? Which is not quite baseball, but what it is players are enjoying themselves again. And I'm not sure, I thought Pakistan should have made the last World Test Championship final based on their draw, and they were fucking horrendous, right? Absolutely terrible. Yeah.
I think
that's me putting it as mildly as I can.
You could say they shat the bed in their honeymoon suite. That's what
they shat the bed in the honeymoon suite after lighting it on fire, right? And then forgetting to get out of it, right? They were lying in the fire bed of shit, right? It was bad. So
It
to
was
go
bad
from
ball.
that to and watching them just play dreary cricket at home, where
Yeah.
uninspired, looked like they'd never take a wicket again, looked like their batters were bored. This just looked fun, and
Yeah.
I didn't watch it as closely as you did, of course, but from my perspective, it just looked like a Pakistani team having a lot of fun and playing really, really good cricket. And I'm not sure we've seen that much of that. When was the last period you saw a Pakistan Test team look like it was having fun? Misbah?
Misbah. Yeah.
Push-ups?
Misbah.
Misbah's push-ups that day?
Probably. Yeah.
Rahat
Or
Ali
maybe
coming out.
that Test series versus the West Indies, the one with Fazil Mohammed. How could he do that or something? He said.
When was that? Was that before or after those? That was around the same year.
2017. That's the last Test series that Misbah and Yunus played, and Pakistan won for the first time in the Caribbean Test series. So
so that one's pretty fair, actually. Think back to it. Those are the two that probably make the most sense. I mean, so that's a step forward, right? I mean, you have to be excited from that point of view. Not to mention that you have a bunch of batters with ridiculous records at the moment, and that's always a fun place to be.
Absolutely. It's interesting because, they did attack, but they picked their battles wisely. There were times in the test match where Pakistan grinded it out. Then versus the spinners, particularly Prabhat Jayasuriya, they used their feet really well, came down the track and nullified Jayasuriya, taking him on, and then also swept really well, particularly South Shakil. I find it really interesting that they hovered around that 4.5, 5 runs and over mark. Because if I think of it, if you play out 90 overs in a day, that gets you 400 runs roughly in a day. And I think that might just be the sweet spot when it comes to run rate in test. Because if you look at either extreme, things could go haywire.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'm less worried about run rates, although I understand what you're saying. And I think your math is correct. Although half the world can't play 90 overs a day. So you do have to probably mark that down a little bit. But for me, it's more about when you're attacking and why you're attacking. And I think we saw that when baseball has been at its best, there's been real thinking behind why they're doing stuff. When it's been at their worst, it's because they're just trying to prove that it's the best way of doing stuff, right? And I thought from the bits I saw of Pakistan, and, to go back to Zimbabwe, I know there's more limited over style, but again, when you've seen those teams, everything they're doing is making sense. They're like, okay, let's take this little bit from England. Let's tweak what we do and make it work for us better rather than trying to reinvent something else. And from that perspective, I think it's a very, very good way of going about it. And look, there is something to be said for finding a strategy that works from your side of things. So what you do well, your pitches, your talent pool, whatever that may be, but also finding a strategy that excites your players, right? There's a lot of cricket played now, and it gets really, really boring. And cricket has probably since the year 2000 come to a point where you can kind of cruise through certain series and then pick it up when you want to and everything else. And it's a bit like, can you do it in a wet Tuesday in Stoke in football, right? And how do you go on a back-to-back game in Utah in basketball, or a double header in Minnesota in baseball or whatever? Those things matter. And enjoying your cricket and feeling, I remember not long after the baseball thing started, Jimmy Anderson was sort of telling people, I can't remember if it was on his podcast or he was just telling people privately, but he was just saying, this is just fun, right? I'm having fun. And those sorts of things really do affect people. And it's easy to get up for big games, and it's easy to get up for World Cups and deciding matches and big series and televised things and all this sort of stuff. It's not always easy to get up for everything else. This Sri Lanka series is not a big series. If Pakistan had slept through this and ended up 1-1, hardcore Pakistani fans would be upset, but it wasn't at home, right?
Yeah.
And it wasn't against England or Australia or, or even South Africa, right? Like, they might have been like, okay, well, Sri Lanka played good last World Test Championship. To be in a situation where you're pushing yourself the way the Pakistan team did, I think that's a really important thing.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And sure, the approach was one of the main contributing factors to why they were able to whitewash the series. But Pakistan also fielded brilliantly, 2 runouts and countless catches. They got 18 catches in the first test. That is unheard of for a Pakistan team, and they dropped
just on the runouts. Do you know how many runouts there were on the Ashes?
0.
Yeah. I think it's the second time in history that's ever happened. I think the other one was 97, 98. Yeah, I think it was 97. It must have been the one in England. I think that's right. That's crazy, right? I mean,
That's absolutely insane.
I mean, and then you talk about the Bairstow one before. Sorry, I didn't want to ruin your Pakistan rant, but
Yeah, I mean,
it does show you that
it's
you don't
funny
always
that
have
the
fun.
Bairstow one was a stumping, right? Otherwise, we would have had a run out. But yeah, I mean, I think Pakistan fielded really, really well. That was another reason why they were able to whitewash this series. And then also just the fact that, their batters, I think they really, all of these young guys, and they're not young in terms of like first class exposure. They've been around for a bit. Saud Shakil is now 27. I think he debuted too late. He averages 87 right now in Test cricket, and he has a record for being the only cricketer in the history of Test cricket to get a 50-plus score in each of his first 7 tests. So I think that is something to work with. Salman Ali Agha was useful with the ball, with the bat, scored a match-winning ton and a game-saving 84 in the first one, the first test. And I think he is someone that in Asian conditions can really help Pakistan, provides a lot of good balance. And then you also obviously have Abdullah Shafiq, who a lot of people had written off, but then he came out and scored a double ton in the second test. And he also, is one of those under 23 cricketers who's already racked up quite good numbers in Test cricket. And I'd say, like, sure, maybe he's batted on a bit friendlier pitches than maybe someone from the Sena nations, but I would say he's right up there with Harry Brook, Shubman Gill, and the lot. So my question to you is,
I think he deserves that level of hype. Even Harry Brook, we've seen when he's gone away, when we're not quite sure what level he's on, but I think that's very fair, from what he's done so far. What do you think of Sri Lanka? Because I kind of focused a bit more on Pakistan this series, just because they were doing well and they were the more interesting team. But as I said, Sri Lanka were doing well over the last couple of years. That's a bit of a kick in the teeth to lose that series so easily.
Yeah, I think Kusal Mendes had a terrible series. I expected better from him because I thought that now he's going to come of age and he's been around. And he had that great series versus Australia all those years ago. The one in which Khawaja was just absolutely terrible. I don't know if you recall or not. He was terrible. And a lot of these Sri Lankan wickets that fell were, due to some casual stroke play. And they just couldn't get underneath those balls, hold out on a fair few occasions. Angelo Matthews had his moments, but he was overall poor, I'd say. And then, of course, you look at Dhananjaya De Silva. He was probably that one shining light for Sri Lanka.
Obviously.
Scored, yeah, of course. Against Pakistan, he averages like 60 or something. And against every other team, that average drops considerably. And he's played over 50 test matches now and has 10 tons. So he's a pretty good player, I'd say. Scored a ton in this series as well, a couple of 50s. He was really, really good. Jayasuriya was nullified by Pakistan, and Sri Lanka didn't really have a trump card up their sleeve. Paces were non-existent.
Yeah.
And then, of course, Ramesh Mendes looked good in the first test, but not particularly in the second. I'd say Babar Azam's captaincy should actually be lauded over here because we are often critical about him, but I think he manufactured a couple of wickets really well, placing his fielders a certain way and then using his bowlers, changing them quite smartly. I think he got Sri Lankan batters to kind of go for that big slog sweep or pull towards cow corner and then kind of, got them out. So he definitely deserves credit for that. I'm not sure if you caught Naseem Shah's spell because there were a lot of videos out.
I've seen highlights, but it's not quite the same.
Well, he was getting the ball to hoop and reverse like in a trajectory that I haven't seen all too frequently recently. That is an extremely promising sign. And he's, he got 3 wickets in the final innings, but I think he is one of the main reasons why Moeen Ali got 7 wickets as well, which was great. I don't know if you followed his career or not, but this is a guy, his innings breakdown. First innings, he averages with the ball in the 70s. Second innings, he averages in the 30s, like 35. Fourth innings, in the 50s, like 51. Third innings, he averages under 20. I've never seen a bowler with that breakdown.
Third innings specialist.
Yeah, third innings destroyer. And he had these really cute celebrations going on. I don't think he's 37. He definitely does not look, 8 years elder than I am. But it's good that a seasoned professional in Pakistan, from Pakistan's domestic circuit, got that big moment in Colombo. And this is a guy who comes from a really small town. So good on Moeen Ali, I think. I think we'll end this podcast on one final question. And I really need to ask you this because, of course, you're probably the best person to ask this. You've seen Pakistan tour Australia. That's one place they just cannot figure out. And maybe you could say that 2016 tour, had Asad Shafiq hung around, they would have chased down that record total. Maybe things could have been different. Had Kamran Akmal hung on to those catches in Sydney in 2010, maybe things could have been different. But Pakistan hasn't won a test match in Australia since Sydney 95, which is now, 28 years. I think Wasim and Waqar and Mushtaq and those guys won them that test. I think Mushtaq in particular, because Sydney tends to turn a bit. Pakistan has a really young batting unit, which is up on confidence, and their bowling unit now comprises of a, experienced duo of Shaheen and Naseem, as opposed to the very fresh and raw duo that toured Australia in 2019. How do you see them faring in this series? Because historically, conventional wisdom suggests that they're not going to do well, but this is as good as they could be placed potentially for the series.
The biggest problem with Australia is that I looked this up during the test, where I think Australian batters averaged 36 runs per wicket at home, right? And the opposition average about 27 or 28. Australian batters are going to make runs in that series. There will be spells that, Afridi will do very well. Naseem, maybe the spinners will pick up some wickets as well. Maybe a third seamer will come in. There's obviously options available there. But when it comes down to it, you don't just beat Australia with spells at home. It has to be a complete effort. If you go back to 2010, 11, 2012, was it? Whenever South Africa won there? No, 2008 was it? When South Africa
Is this the
won
Faf du Plessis series?
No. This was the one where they broke the record in Perth in that chase.
Oh, okay, yeah, the one in which AB went crazy.
Just completely like a dominant overall attack, because if you don't do that, you can't beat them. Right? Their bowlers are going to get wickets. They may not destroy you, but their bowlers are going to get wickets at home. And so you have to be in a situation where your bowlers are absolutely good enough for long periods of the time. And so generally what happens is you'll get someone come over, Ishant Sharma spell or a Kemar Roach spell, or whoever the bowler may be. Lasif Malinga did it back in the day. But unless they're second and third spells, which you usually have to bowl against Australian batters, that's where I would worry about it. And if you can't take those wickets, it doesn't matter if your batters are going to do well or not, right? Because if you can't stop them scoring 400 plus in almost, over and over again, they will find wickets against you, even if you have informed batters, just because, that's all their bowlers are massively tall and massively fast. And Nathan Lyon gets overspin and everything else. Plus now they've got, a spare bowler in their lineup, which gives them even more flexibility in their lineup. So that's the problem for any team going to Australia. The best way of beating them is to tire them out, right? It's what India did years ago. It's what England did in 11-12. It's sort of what South Africa did when they won, which is literally keep their bowlers in the field for as long as possible. That doesn't translate as well now that they have a fifth bowling option as it used to, but that depends on Green's fitness, Green's form. Mitchell Marsh, is good for about 8 overs, 8 to 12 overs a day. He can't bowl 15 to 20 overs a day, probably, just because of the way he bowls. Also, his body would fall apart, I think. So it really is, that's how you beat them. I think you keep them in the field for a prolonged period of time, which they're not used to doing in Australia specifically. And that's your way of winning. Look, Pakistan have the batting form at the moment. I know it's a mile out, so it doesn't matter that much.
Yeah.
But from that perspective, I think they have that side of it. Whether that holds up in Australia, though, we just don't know, right? Like they've done well in Sri Lanka, they've done well in Pakistan. That's absolutely nothing like what they're going to face in Australia. And I think the biggest average differential between home and away teams in a country is Australia. I think South Africa is about 7 runs and Australia's about 8 or 9, as I said before. And I think I think there's a reason that those two countries have the biggest average differential. And it's because those are the two countries with the freakish bounce. And everyone there's sideways movement. You have sideways movement all around the world. You get sideways movement in Asia with the new ball, right? The only place that you get consistent high bounce is in those two locations. And I think that overseas batters have the biggest trouble with that. And I think if you look, and I think me and Cheyenne might have looked this up the other day, maybe based on the same conversation, when you look at how Asian teams do over there, it completely fits the stereotype of, and it should fit the stereotype, right? Like it's the same as that Australian batters, have traditionally struggled when the ball is moving sideways, because the ball doesn't move sideways as much in Australia. And so if you go overseas, it's a different kind of game. And so, these things do play a part. So that's the template for me, right? The bowlers need to be good as a unit, not in individual spells. And the batters need to tire the Australian bowlers out.
Yeah, that's interesting. And of course, I mean, that bounce has troubled Pakistan. And there's a reason why Australia and South Africa are the only two venues that they haven't conquered in Test cricket. They've never won a Test series over there. Just one final thought. India did this. They set leg side fields for Australia and kind of got them caught out over there in one of those series that they won. You think maybe smart captaincy could play a part over here if they are to win a Test match or two?
I think the only other thing I would say is that it is possible that Australia might have 3 of their top 4 new. I don't think it'll be 3. I think it'll be more likely to be 2. It might even only be 1. It might just be Warner who disappears. But so from that perspective, that's another potential weakness from that point of view. Look, smart captaincy is fine, but smart captaincy gets you 1 or 2 wickets. Like, people get really excited about smart captaincy. It's not going to get you 15 wickets, right? 15 wickets is going to be if Afridi can be consistently threatening, right?
Yeah.
If Naseem can be consistently threatening, because especially in Australia, it's easy to bowl a good first spell in Australia as a fast bowler. Second and third spells is when that Kookaburra ball does not like those Australian wickets, despite the fact it was invented there. And those Australian batters will punish you, right? You know, if you've got Travis Head and Mitchell Marsh in the middle, they're going to score really quickly. Yeah, Cameron Green can score really quickly when he wants to. Alex Carey will slash away as well. And then Marnus and Smith will just manipulate you to death, right? You can't bowl bad spells. You have to keep the pressure on them again and again. And the spinner is almost the most important job from that point of view. You know, Ashwin has bowled some really good spells in Australia, and Herath have bowled some really good spells, and Vittori have bowled some really good spells, but they haven't taken wickets. But they haven't let the opposition, they haven't let the Australians get away from them. It needs a full court press because there's nothing else you can do against them. Just because, as I said, they have such a natural advantage. That's why I always laugh when Australians go, "Oh, we don't doctor our wicket like all these other countries do." And it's like, no, our wickets come pre-doctored. Like, we don't need to pre-doctor our wickets. We just need them to be our wickets, and people are really going to struggle on them because it's not a natural way to play for most parts of the world. You don't leave on length. That's a whole different part of cricket that you have to factor into playing in Australia.
Absolutely. And well, only time will tell how Pakistan fared. That'll be all from this episode of the Uncovered podcast. I'm Behram Qazi. You can find me at Def Mango on Twitter. And with me, of course, is Jared Kimber. You can find him everywhere at @JaredKimber. That'll be all for this podcast. We'll see you again next week. And yeah, we're going to play this ad in 3, 2, 1. Here we go.